Is your life just filled with like anxiety and angst at this point? Right, you're just living in it. And then from your childhood, that's probably all you've ever known.
That's a great choice of words, is the anxiety piece from it. And you wouldn't believe how chill I am these days.
Well, I can tell right now. So you're acquiring skills.
Yeah, so oh my gosh. And so over a 10-year period, I went from that mailroom to being the senior vice president of a $40 million financial consulting firm. So a lot of times I'm partnered up with those people and I get to the real life part of it to say, I know exactly what you went through. Here's an example I went through. Here's what I did differently. And teach them how to take those steps forward. You just got a job at McDonald's. Let me tell you what you can do to go to the next level. You want to make more money? Here's how you do that, right? Or I've been addicted to this drug. Here's the steps you take to move off of that.
All right, Michael, welcome to Becoming a Better You podcast. So today we're going to talk about your book, Rock Bottom. And this is basically a story from being homeless to the mailroom and then the boardroom.
There you go.
Right? So just kind of start us off here. So tell me about where you grew up, your childhood, and how that affected you as a person.
Yeah, I think that's where it begins. I mean, so I was born in two separate families, as many kids grow up in a broken home. 50% of all marriages end up in divorce. Well, that's kind of the way mine ended up. My mom was in St. Louis, and my father moved down to Texas. And then I was 3 or 4 years old. First home I remember was a garage, one car garage. It was a makeshift apartment. And that's where my mom lived and my sister lived. And then I moved down to Texas with my dad and his new wife and her kids. So I had stepbrothers now, and so I bounced back and forth between those two homes. It was an interesting upbringing as a kid, 3 or 4 or 5 years old. You meet your new family down in Texas. You go out to play with the kids just like everybody else, doing the same thing your stepbrothers are doing. And then you realize your stepmom is not a big fan of yours, and she comes out, and for unknown reasons to me, she breaks a branch off of a rose bush with the thorns on it. And I had one real little brother and myself, and my 2 stepbrothers that were older. And she grabbed my little brother and me, and she started switching us with this rose bush branch till we bleed, and we were screaming. We were so shocked and surprised.
And she didn't do that to her own children.
If that's the point, right? So we were doing the exact same thing as their kids were doing, and we were getting beat for it, and they were getting praised for it.
So what does that say? How old are you at this point?
Probably 4 or 5 years old.
So how do you internalize that, right? So does that, like, automatically you're assuming that you're bad, right? Because, like, externally the circumstances are the same. You probably feel unloved. Like, what were your emotions at that age?
Yeah, so it's a great point. The confused is a good word, but it went further than that, because when we started crying or screaming, she would pull us in and say, if you don't stop, it's going to get worse. So we learned how to hold in all of our feelings, our rage, our insecurities. Everything was just kept bottled up. And so that was just the beginning of my life with this new family that went on for over a decade. And her sons, my stepbrothers, also jumped in on the abuse. And we were abused, my brother and I, relentlessly for a decade behind the scenes while my father was at work.
Did you and your brother ever have discussions about that?
Yeah, so the only thing we had was each other.
Sure.
We felt, right? So we would depend on each other, and we would fight for each other, defend. Their stories in the book about how I defended him or he defended me.
From her or just in general?
From her and the stepbrothers.
Okay.
Our stepbrothers, and it spilled out into school. So you can imagine I'm an awkward kid growing up in Texas with clothes, ripped up clothes, going to school, and there's just all kinds of stories about that. So we were bullied and picked on at school, but we would defend each other. So we would stay with my dad and my stepmother, and all that was going on behind the scenes down in Texas. We'd go to school there, and in the summer, we would go to my mother's. Well, my mother, you think it's a reprieve, but my mother was a raging alcoholic. And I had at least 9 different stepfathers growing up. And there was abuse that went on there with these stepfathers. And so that was going on behind the scenes. And we'd wake up in the morning, again, 5, 6, 7 years old. My mom would wake us up and take us to the bar where we'd spend the entire day in the bar. And we'd hustle for food or drinks or whatever. And she would drink and bring home different men and things like that. Well, that was my life as a child, growing up to a teenager, bouncing back and forth between these 2 broken homes.
Did you know it was different than most people?
That's a really good question, Mark. Did I know it? I don't know that I knew it as a kid. I just remember no confidence, just concerned about everything, afraid to do anything because I didn't know I was going to get beat or be picked on or have the stepfather.
Yeah, you're basically walking on eggshells.
All the time.
Did you tell your father? Was your father there?
So one of the ways it came to a head was I was in the 2nd grade. So my stepmom was really jealous of my real mom. And my dad really loved my real mom, but she was an alcoholic, and he ended up losing his job and everything so he had to get away from it. So he marries her. So she was so jealous that before we would go visit my mom for the summer, she would take my brother and I. In one example, 2nd grade, she lays us down on a bed and she takes a belt and flogs us across our backs to remind us if we say anything, this is what can happen to you. We never said anything to Dad or anything. And then we get up to Missouri and my mom is changing our shirts and she sees the huge welt marks across her back and she knew where they came from. So that's when my father found out, and she called and just threatened holy hell on my dad and my stepmom. My dad didn't know anything about it. So he ended up leaving my stepmom with us. And
were those his biological kids or from a previous marriage?
No, hers from a previous marriage. But to your point, Mark, they had a child together. Okay, that was a few years younger than my brother and me. So they had a child together. He leaves with us, and a couple of weeks later, he comes back. And he tells us that it's not going to happen anymore. We've worked it out. It's not going to happen anymore. But I don't want your little brother, your half-brother, the one they had together, to come from a broken home like you two did. So we're going to make this work. Everything will be fine. My dad goes to work during the day, and the rage starts up again by all of them consistently. So now we don't trust anybody about anything going on. And so it came to head when I was 15, when my stepmom tried to hit me again. I stopped her from hitting me. How
tall were you then at 15?
I was probably 6 foot tall, but here's the interesting part.
I'm still waiting for that myself.
Yeah, good luck. Shoes. So my arms were the size of my wrist. I mean, I was malnourished. Yeah, I didn't have any body whatsoever, barely ate, things like that. And so when she did that and I stopped her and I said, it ends here, and I ended up leaving at 15 years old, hitchhiking across the country, ended up back at my mom's. At the end of the day, from that point on, I never lived at either of those homes permanently. I went out on my own.
For you then, now we're grown up. We're how old now?
15, 16 years old, hitchhiking across the country, and that's when the homelessness started for the first time. Okay,
so but how old are we right now today for you?
Today, you want me?
You're not a woman. I can ask you.
Say that out loud, or what?
If you didn't look good, I wouldn't ask you.
Yeah, so I'll be 62 on my next birthday.
So at 62, looking back at what you went through in the first 15 years, right? How did that end up benefiting you as a person later on in life?
Whew. And we're talking about if I'm thinking about it now.
Yeah.
I, every day, do not regret everything that happened when I was a kid, because for some reason, it happened to me with me so I can be here today doing exactly what I'm doing with you, Mark.
Correct.
I mean, so if I could spread the word, because there's a good message. This is, you're only hearing the bad parts about it. Things worked out okay for me. Didn't work out okay for some of my family members.
Yeah. And so were there some characteristics that you developed, and we'll talk about what happened after you're 15. Those are the formative years though, right? From when you're first born to you're 15, your identity, your traits, learning about love and trust, that was all broken for you.
Completely.
Right? So we'll talk of your story if you learned how to do that later on in life. But looking back now, what advantage, because this is a story about overcoming the odds, what advantage did that give you as opposed to somebody who maybe did come from a so-called perfect home, right? Because there's some traits that you learned very soon that would maybe somebody never learns.
Yeah. So, and again, I tell that all the time, right? If I wouldn't, I became resourceful. I became protective of my brother. I became protective of people who couldn't protect themselves. I had a rage inside of me that I learned how to manage, which took some work and didn't always work out. But I did that. I was able to grow up very quickly. I mean, again, I was living on my own at 15, albeit in a gutter somewhere or something like that. But still, I ended up learning how to do that. And I learned how to appreciate those who were dealing with this. So when I see abuse today and hear about abuse today, and there's stories about that, it's just, I know what that feels like inside. And it's just completely changed me. And it could have went a different path.
So talk to me about that. So now we're 15. We moved out. We hitchhiked across the country. But we didn't get to live again with the mom, your mom.
Nope. No. So I'd go back and I'd stay there every once in a while. But my mom, again, was a drunk. She could drink a fifth of whiskey a day and you wouldn't even know she was drunk. And that was with regularity. So whenever she wanted to date somebody or have an evening alone or thing, she'd call the police on us to have us thrown out of the apartment. And then she was constantly getting evicted and things like that. So I ended up living on the streets. So here I am, 15 years old.
Did you leave your brother behind?
Yeah. So my brother ended up going a different path.
Okay.
Eventually he did leave, but my brother became a drug addict. And he was spending his time in and out of rehab.
Okay.
And so we separated at that point. And so
was that hard for you as a protective brother?
Yeah, it was. And it's amazing how it turns out today because my brother has a really awesome life and family. I feel like I do. And we may not talk for months, but when we do, we can pick it up just like we had talked yesterday. I mean, it's just a really close bond. But we all have our lives going on. Right. And he ended up, surviving a lot too, just in a different path. Sure. But ended up turning out okay. And so I'm living in alleyways, rooftops in St. Louis, trying to stay warm, staying in threshold doorways so I can block the wind because it's so cold. Don't have anything, begging, borrowing, stealing for everything I could get, hitchhiking, as I mentioned. And then I met a new family, okay? This family was a bunch of social misfits like myself, social throwaways. I didn't realize until we were tagged by the Maplewood Police Department, we were a street gang. And so there was a gang of us, right? My hair by this time was all the way down to my waist. I had been in trouble already and I was getting ready to get in a lot more trouble, but we were a street gang that lived in abandoned houses.
Did you consider yourself a street gang or they labeled you as that?
No, they labeled us as that. We just considered us as a group.
Yeah.
But then other gangs started labeling us like we were the boys from the south side of St. Louis, and so we would be running into this west side gang or things like that, and that's where I ended up being stabbed, shot at, set on fire. A lot of things happened in that regard, and there was a lot of damage. So that rage that I had started coming out through this violence, And then before I know it, I got involved with drugs, alcohol, incarceration, crime, and it just went on from there. So then I started ending up in lockup.
Well, take me through the mindset before we get into the gang of being homeless, right? So like a normal mindset for somebody who's 15 at this time. What am I going to wear to school? What girl do I have a crush on? What's for lunch? What video game am I playing, right? That's like your mindset. What's your mindset as being homeless at 15? Is it, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep tonight? Like, what is that mindset?
Yeah, it's trying to find your footing, right? And to your point, right? You're thinking about what you're going to eat. You're thinking about how you can hustle. You're thinking about hitting this store and going in there and doing this. You're thinking about hanging around with these people that are the wrong people, but they've got drugs or food or something like that. So you start
out of necessity
gravitating. Yeah, I mean, you don't know it, but that's what it ends up being. So that's what your mindset is. But all at the same time, to your point about what did I learn? The person we haven't talked about is my father. And the one thing I learned from my father was he wasn't around when we were kids, when we were going through all that, but he was always working. He was always losing his job, but he was always working because he got laid off or whatever. He's a blue collar worker, and he was always working. So I learned this work ethic. And one of the things that it turned out that the only thing that saved me was finding a job where I could break away from that. And I was working and I had a strong work ethic. I was there early, stayed late and things like that. So I started learning and gravitating towards that when I was a kid.
You really need to put your energy in something else.
Exactly.
Well, take me through the decision point then, right? So when was your decision point? Because like when you were homeless initially 15, maybe you could have got a job then, right? But we had to get to that decision point where you're like, no, my life is going down this path. There's always another path I can take, right? And you can always see people in society going down that path, right? People who are ahead of you, they're just a marker so you can see this is possible, right? Like when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile, nobody had done that before him, right. And then everyone started doing it. Right. So what was the point where you were at your lowest, where you were like, I need to get a job now and not go back to the gang?
Well, it was about money, right? I needed money and nobody was going to give it to me. I mean, there was a point, and there's the second time I was homeless, but there was a point when I was such a disaster as far as a human being that everybody, family, friends, people I knew closed their door on me. I knew they were there. They wouldn't let me in. I didn't have a place. I knew if it is to be, it's up to me. And I had to figure it out. So I got a job, any job. So I got a job bagging groceries in a grocery store. And I got that job. Well, I took that job, and there's a story of how I changed that job into something meaningful as far as financially.
Is that the first time you felt a sense of purpose?
Yeah, probably is. Probably is. I thought I had purposes before, but it was girlfriends that were going through the same thing as I was, and I thought I was saving them, but I really wasn't. I was making it worse. And you thought you were saving friends or things like that from drugs and all that, and you were a part of it. And so it wasn't until it's kind of separated myself from the others. Sure. Because suddenly everybody wanted to be around me because I had a job and I had money. So go figure.
How did you stop the addiction part?
Yeah, so that took a lot longer. I mean, it took a lot longer. What happened is I was sitting there looking at everybody around me, and I was watching my future. I had friends that became drug addicts and ended up dying. I had one guy that I hung out with, again, in the book I talk about him, one of the toughest guys I've ever seen or met in my entire life. And I told him one time, somebody's always going to be tougher. And they ended up finding him with his face blown off with a .357 Magnum over a drug deal. So that was the path. Another guy went crazy. Another guy ended up getting locked up, getting life because he was a habitual criminal. It was his job, and he kept getting caught. They threw away the key. And so I said, do I want to do these paths? And I was looking at my family, my stepbrothers who were living off the government and workers' comp and issues all the time. And my stepmom was, my dad not being able to hold a job and blue collar job. And I said, this is my path. And that's where rock bottom comes up and you hit that crossroads. You have to decide, do I go down the road that I only ever know, which is all of that I just talked about, or do I unlearn everything and start a new path in a different direction? And that's what I did.
And how many people actually at that point do you believe choose the better path?
That's a good question. I don't know how many people choose that path. I know it must not be a lot because of all the homelessness we still have, all of the drug addictions, all the deaths, all the gang, all the violence, all the crime, all the prisons filled up. But when I speak at the prisons, I've spoken at minimum, maximum, medium security prisons here in New York, wherever. And when I speak to them, I tell them the story that I don't know what choices you made to get here and what ended up landing you here, but you could start tomorrow, no matter what your crime was, developing your legend. Starting with writing your own story. You had a past. Write your story. Even if it goes nowhere, you've written your story and you're leaving it, right? And so, or whether you're in the prison and you're doing volunteer work or whatever, just be the best you can at that and you'll stand out. I mean, you have this opportunities because a lot of them were saying, they would tell me that, listen, you don't understand what it's like to be hooked on crack. You don't understand what it's like to be hooked on this drug or that drug. And I said, there's a lot of things that I can't relate to with what you're talking about. But when it comes to drugs, there's not a drug that you've done that I haven't done, and many of them I was addicted to. So you can tell me all that, and you can use that as your reason, and I'm going to tell you that I've been there and that I've done that, and I'm trying to tell you how I got out of it.
And as a teacher, a mentor, uplifting people, you have to break their beliefs, right? So about themselves. It's the same thing we do, people want to lose weight or, with kids who have no confidence. I have to break your beliefs so you can open up and instill new beliefs, right? Because a belief is just thoughts you keep thinking about yourself.
Exactly.
So what do you think gave you the inspiration to choose the better path? Was it divine intervention? Was it, because you seem like a very caring person. Was it innately like your soul where you were like, you knew what was right and where you had to go? Why do you think you made that decision?
So I can remember sitting in this alley, right, in this doorway, and the wind was cutting through, and I was freezing. My coat had holes in it, and I was just freezing. I had nowhere to go, nothing, didn't know what tomorrow held. And I was sitting there freezing, and I go, I know I'm better than this. I don't know why my path led me here, but I know I'm better than this. If I could just get an opportunity, I would not, be unsuccessful with it. Just somebody open a door, a window, a crack, anything to give me an opportunity, and I will change. I will make a change, and I will change others, and I will be successful, whatever it is that I did. So that's what I coach people on. It didn't matter if I was working at McDonald's. If I worked at McDonald's, I saw myself as the district manager running the chain of McDonald's. So what happened at this grocery store, I was bagging groceries.
How'd you get that job?
So, funny story. I was drunk at a party at 17, maybe 16, 17. And I was at this party with, believe it or not, another family with the last name Cooley. And that's how I got invited to the party. You got to meet these people, right? And it was a husband and wife that managed this grocery store, and we knew their daughter named Connie, and we went to her party. Well, the parents partied harder than the teenagers, and we packed in this place. And I was hanging out with the gang, right? And so one of the guys' name in the gang was Michael, and I was Michael. Well, the next day, we all wake up all over the place, and we're passed out. Some of us left, and I came over to see Connie, and her dad came out and said, "You, Michael?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "You ready to start working?" And I go, "Yes, I am."
There you go.
Turns out it was the other guy? Michael.
Yeah.
He ended up giving him the job. He lasted 2 weeks. I ended up bagging groceries, lasting 2 years, and going on to manage that grocery store.
So both of you got the job? He hired both of you?
Hired both of us.
So I'm a big believer in like what you put out is what you get back. I'm also a big believer in that, like, contrast. So stuff that goes wrong in your life, such as like your upbringing, breeds desire, because like without that contrast, like you don't have that desire to go to. So that's what I was saying before, where like if you didn't have that upbringing, again, we'll talk about where you are now and where you've been, but like you might not have had all those desires.
Oh, that's so true.
Right. And like a lot of times what people need to understand, because this is kind of in our wheelhouse, we both like to uplift people, is that when you hit rock bottom, it's kind of like a rubber band, right? It gets pulled back. And then once you make the decision to change your life, it shoots you forward, right? And a lot of times you've heard a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot, but you've definitely heard the stories about people being at rock bottom and then being way more successful than, say, the average person.
Right.
Right? Like kind of your story we're going to talk about. Any thoughts on that?
Well, to your point, I think a rubber band's a great analogy, right? It can either catapult you forward.
You can use that. I won't charge you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I appreciate that. I got another book coming out. We'll work on that. So I appreciate it. I've used quotes, believe me. And so the rubber band theory, but there's also the other side of that rubber band pulls. As you pull a rubber band, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And for some people, it breaks. And then they break, and then they've lost their way, whether it be to drugs or homelessness or crime or whatever. So the fact, if you can ride that rubber band and you have that desire because of your past, you're right, it can catapult you forward. And here's the deal. I had no skills or nothing.
But you had desire.
Yeah, desire. Yeah. I had want to, need to, have to.
I mean, honestly, too, if you went from homeless to just working in a store with bathrooms, you could probably get food,
sleep there.
You know what I'm saying?
I had keys to the place.
But this is what I'm saying. Like, that's a total life-changing. So if people are down on their luck now, or you know, we'll get to the homeless in a second, or maybe just if you can get a job where maybe it's a mom and pop shop, right, where they can kind of take care of you, put a car, like that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, you know, a full leap. You just have to make, life is a culmination of decisions. You just have to make the decision that gets you to where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And when can it start? It's never too late to start. Again, you hear that. It starts tomorrow.
Yeah.
Just get up and do something different.
Or even right now.
Today. Yeah.
Even right now.
Right now at this moment,
yeah.
Right?
So for somebody being homeless, right? So I know that's a huge epidemic now around, you know, the country, even in Cranston where I live. But as someone who came from there, how could somebody help you being homeless? Like what would you want from somebody to say, hey, Michael, right? Like, here's a job. Now, again, there's many facets of being homeless, right? It could be addiction. It could be, you know, physical or mental impairments. It could be, you know, abused as a child. So I know there's many reasons why somebody would be homeless, but how could the public help versus just looking at it as like a nuisance, right?
Yeah. So, you know, the Bible quote, right? You give somebody a fish, they eat for a day. You teach them how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. I think the key is teaching people how to get back on their feet, giving them examples that compare to theirs. What happens is I've spoken to places where they had neuropsychologists come in and psychiatrists and everybody using all that scientific background, but have no real life experience to understand what they've gone through. So a lot of times I'm partnered up with those people and I get to the real life part of it to say, oh, I know exactly what you went through. Here's an example I went through. Here's what I did differently.
Yep.
And teach them how to take those steps forward. You just got a job at McDonald's. Let me tell you what you can do to go to the next level. You want to make more money? Here's how you do that, right? And do that. Or I've been addicted to this drug. Here's the steps you take to move off of that.
Almost like a life coach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you think homeless have life coaches?
No, and I think I think that's like I think to solve it. I mean, you'll never solve it. You know, there's always going to be new people who have new problems, right? But to be able to really help people in that position, I think you do need to have places where they can go. They can get life coaching, right? They can get skills.
I agree.
You're going to need to have like addiction counselors, mental health, right? You probably have to have city planning to have these facilities. But
and if I could just tell you the other side of it, right? So I spoke at the New York Correctional Convention in New York City. They had 400 correctional officers and everything around the correctional organization. Well, I went to the prisoners. I spoke to the prisoners. I coached the prisoners. I hopefully inspired them. I did the same thing with the correctional officers. So they could see when you're looking at this person.
It's a person.
As a criminal,
yeah.
right? And you're abusing them and you think they're hustling you and you don't give them the time of day or anything versus actually giving them lessons on and talking to them about what you do and things like that to step them forward. It doesn't always work, but we can't do it just one or two or three of us. But if you educate human beings to treat people like human beings, that's literally how I climb back into society.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing too, like whatever it is, whatever you want to change, the ingredient you need is desire, right? Because like we can't do it for you. So you have to have the desire to make the change and stay with it. And then you can coach them on the way, right? Like when we do like fitness sales, one of the things we'll say before I even accept them into the program is be like, okay, Michael, right? So like, I'll give you the specials at the end. You can say yes or no. But the big thing is like, I can't want this for you more than you want it for yourself, right? That's true. And if you, and I've had some people, sometimes I use like a 0 to 10 scale. They'll be like a 3 out of 10, 10 being like, I really want this. We're not going to get anywhere because you're not ready, right? And you have to be ready to make that change, which you were, okay? So, all right, so we get the first job. We're probably feeling prideful. Is that a word? I think so.
Yeah, sure.
We're feeling confident. We're feeling have a purpose in life, which is
definitely
huge.
A purpose. I had a place to go. I had
shelter.
I couldn't go here or there because
you were probably the best employee.
I can't go hang out, right? So I have to go here. Now let me just back up to say my first job was 11 years old, and it was I wanted a new bike. Right? Talk about desire. My dad's not gonna buy me a new bike. I made $1 a week in allowance. So my goal was I got a job as a dishwasher in a truck stop because I wanted this new bike. I could earn $8 in one day. Are you kidding me? And working with this truck stop. I was 11, but you notice I'm kind of tall for my age. I was back then too. So I told him I was 15 and I got the job and I did that to get a bike. Well, that just started my desire for working. And back to my dad's work ethic, I kind of started seeing that in him, and I started doing it. Yeah, exactly.
Did you do that because you? How much love do you think your father gave you?
So, nobody growing up, my dad, my mother, my stepmother, anybody around me, nobody ever told me they loved me. In fact, quite the contrary. My stepmother said, I wish you would have never come into this family. You're messing up my relationship with your father and all of that. Wish you'd never been around. My mom would get drunk and say, I wish you'd never been born. It just shouldn't be here. So I had that kind of negative impact. So I knew my dad loved me, and I only heard it close to his passing. When he didn't even tell me, he told somebody else how proud he was of me and how much he loved me and all of that. So,
who's the first person who told you they loved you?
Probably a girl that didn't realize what love was.
How did you feel when they said that? Did you know what to feel?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was hormones. It was all those kind of things as a teenager that you're growing up in. And I didn't experience real love probably until I met my wife today. And I've been married before, and that wasn't real love. And
what's the difference?
So my first wife, who I was with for 3 years, was she was needing me. She was wanting me. She was wanting somebody to partner with. She was wanting somebody to party with, to make excuses for, to actually go do her own thing and have me there to do stuff. And
were you trying to save her?
Yeah. So and vice versa. I think she thought she was trying to save me because I had issues as well. It was a worse recipe. We both drank. We both did drugs. We both partied. In fact, when she did drugs throughout, and that's what kind of broke us up at the end. And when I met my wife, I was so scarred when I met her, and we met, and I actually met her and was going to go out with her a couple of times. She had been good for a few dates and things like that, and then I would move on. But then,
would you move on because you were afraid to get close?
Yes. And I
did she know that?
Yeah, she knew later.
Okay.
Because she went home and told her mom that she was going to marry me. I was getting ready to tell her I was done with her, only because, okay, she's a coat check girl. She doesn't have a future. It's just another girl I'm being involved with. Come to find out, right, I get to know her background. She was doing that coat check thing on the weekend. She was paying for her own schooling to Texas Women's University. She was working catering late at night. She worked at a restaurant when she wasn't going to school. All of these things she had going on. She was a nutritionist and dietitian by trade. And so she had all this stuff going on. And then I was like, I need to push her away for another way because she's too good for me. I'll never live up to her.
What were you doing at that point? Were you already successful?
No, I was on my way though.
Okay.
That's when I started out in the mailroom.
Okay. So going back to her for a second, how did you know you loved her if you didn't experience love as a child?
And it wasn't right away. Like I said, I pushed her off and we went for something years. But one of the things that turned it around, golly, it's going to choke me up. She better not hear this. But one of the things that made the difference, that changed everything about me and my life, was she, for 4 years, right? And she would not give up on me. She loved me unconditionally. I saw that in her. She did everything. She did her job. She did everything. She let me have my space. She did whatever. But I never once knew that she wasn't thinking about me, caring about me, loving me. And it just built in me to a point where I could not stop but just pour my love into her. And I did this extravagant proposal thing. She was going to break up with me because we had been almost 5 years in and I hadn't proposed to her. And she didn't realize that for a year I was doing things like planning the proposal, renting out a restaurant, buying these diamonds and putting them together to create this perfect ring for her, setting the timing up and everything and making it work. And when it happened, both of us knew it was forever. And now we're 30 years into this thing.
So take me back. So we are bagging groceries and we become district manager.
Yeah, so we're bagging groceries, and what happened was it was the weekend before Thanksgiving coming up. It was the biggest day of the year for them money-wise. I worked a night shift. The two people that ran the place were up in their perch overlooking the grocery store, and I was wrapping up. I was the last one there wrapping up, and this is what I coach anybody on, right? You see what this requires. And so I'm taking my cash drawer up to the thing to close out the night. And they're sitting there freaking out up at the perch, just arguing back and forth and going, oh my God, what are we going to do? And what happened was the cleaning crew the night before the big day didn't show up. They didn't make it. They couldn't come or something like that. And they couldn't find anybody. They didn't know what they were going to do. And so I gave them the cash drawer. I walked down the steps, walked to the back. And then when they told me that they looked down and they saw me like halfway through the store, mopping the floor, one aisle at a time, straightening everything out, just going through the store from end to end and literally ready to work all night to clean the store to make it ready for their big day tomorrow. They walked down the stairs, and that next day they promoted me to the night manager.
Yeah, as an employer, and you're an employer as well. Right. Like if you're an employee, you want to make yourself so valuable to the business that the owner doesn't want to fire you. They want to promote you. And it's doing things like that by taking initiative, right? That's how you skyrocket. Like, cool, like you can come ask me for a raise, And I might say yes or no, but if I see you're taking initiative to do things, I don't have to ask you to do them, you become so valuable to the business that I can't afford to lose you. That's how you get ahead.
That's exactly right. And if you are connected with your employees, right, they're not going to I never asked for a raise, yet I did kind of okay with my pay increases throughout. And to your point, it's about creating that value. But as an employer, you also have to recognize that value and say, oh my gosh, are we so much better together? And,
right.
And do that. And now I work because I like to work. I don't have to work because I have to.
So where do we go from there? Right, we went from the supermarket to where?
Yeah, to trouble.
Back to trouble?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
When people
Old habits die hard.
Yeah, where was your rock bottom? I was like, well, it happened several times.
Okay, fill me in.
So what happened was on a weekend, right, I was with the boys. There were 5 of us.
Is this a new group of guys?
No, some of them are the same, some of them are different. I still haven't broken away from the gang, and they were dependent on me now because I had money. So we got together and we went and bought 5 cases of beer between 5 of us, and we drive around snowing or whatever started to fall, and we went and got these 5 cases of beer across the board in Illinois. Came back, and we did 5 hits of acid between us. And so we were insanely wired. We went through all the beer. So we were like drunk, fired up on drugs. And we ended up breaking into a liquor store to get more liquor. We couldn't get in. So we went to a grocery store. Again, this is how insane we do things sometimes. We tied a chain to the back of the grocery store and tried to rip the doors off of the grocery store with our car, but it was snowing, so the wheels didn't turn, but it set off the alarm. And so out of nowhere, of course we have to do it in the supposed toughest police district in the city, 2nd District, surrounded our car. We're all high and out of our minds on drugs. I remember all the flashing lights. The police were mad because we tried to do that. They took me and handcuffed me, and others as well. They placed my head on the trunk of the car, and they started beating me with a .357 Magnum, the pistol, and then they went to get a slapjack, an 8-ounce ball of steel and leather, and started hitting my head, and my head opened up like a valley with the blood gushing out of it. Ambulances come, I get locked up, get in jail again. And so I end up going away, getting out on probation, and ended up losing that job. They didn't do well anyway, but I ended up losing that job and having to recover again.
What were you telling yourself that next time you were in jail?
I was just scared. I just wake up.
And how old were you?
I did. 17.
Okay.
Yeah, 17-ish. And so I was a juvenile then, or at least 16, 17. I was in the juvenile range, so they gave me probation because of my first offense. But I ended up doing something similar again, stupid, and ended up getting locked up as an adult.
Okay.
Across from, I was in a cell with somebody who was telling me how he accidentally shot his wife and child.
Did you believe him?
Well, I didn't know what to believe. He scared me to think that he shot these people by accident or otherwise. He said he was cleaning his gun. You know how that goes. And then come to find out, I read the story when I got out about what he really did.
Yeah.
And I was with the guy that just killed his family. And so those kinds of things really, at least they did for me, they were eye-openers for me. But I just was so lost, right? And I was just so lost. And even the jobs I had, while I did well for the jobs that I was doing, I wasn't finding my calling. I was hanging out with the same people. It wasn't until I broke that chain, i.e. my wife, and I stopped hanging out with that crew, relocated, started over, and started building my life in a different direction.
Was that a conscious decision to leave the area to start over?
Yeah.
Okay, so you knew if I continue on this road, I'm probably going to die or be in jail the rest of my life.
So much so that I took a job at a place called Weber Aircraft back in the little town I lived in, Gainesville, with my dad. Stepmom lived there. So he was working at this Weber Aircraft. He got me a job and I came back and I hitchhiked back and worked there so I could just completely get away from St. Louis and the gangs and all that kind of stuff. So I did that and I had a job and it was a good job. And even there I started doing well at this Weber Aircraft because, again, this is things I try to teach is I was just a machinist. I was drilling parts for airlines and things like that. And but they offered things. They were starting up this quality work circle thing. And so I volunteered for it just to get out of drilling for a little bit and do this for an hour a week or something. And I ended up, really making a difference on the quality circle group. And I ended up getting voted to head up that group and started doing that. So I started getting recognition on that.
Was that one of your first times of being a leader?
Well, I was the manager at that grocery store.
Okay.
I had to fire my own brother. I mean,
okay.
I was manager.
You seem to leave that part out.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to do that because I also gave him a job.
Yeah.
But he went on break and he was gone for 2 hours. I didn't know where he was. And he was down in the basement with a whole mountain of marijuana roaches where him and his buddies had decided to smoke. And so he was okay with it though. He didn't mind.
Yeah, because he was high.
Yeah, he did, but he ended up doing all right. So yeah, no, I had done that, but those leader opportunities were where I knew that I had an opportunity. But it's also learning some skills. Like when I was at Weber, they offered a free blueprint reading course, so I took that. Right, just figure out how to read blueprint. So to your point, there was a desire there just to do things, even though I wasn't destined to have this skill or that skill or this skill. People, say, how do you, I'm here in college, because I speak to Bryant University, Salve, Regina, and things like that. And they're like, I'm here, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I said, I'm 60 years old. I'm not sure what I want to do.
You ever hear that quote where they talk about when you're young, you think adults have their life together?
Yeah.
And then you become an adult and you're like, nobody has that life together.
No,
right?
No.
I think that comes to the point of skill stacking. So when you're first starting to do something, or if you're just trying to learn different skills, right? You start at the entry level, right? It could be, okay, I'm taking the blueprint course. Now, say if you stayed with that. Okay, so now maybe I'm learning how to write a blueprint, right? Or now I'm learning how to construct things from the blueprint.
Yep.
And now I have a team that constructs it for me. So as you start learning skills, you pick the skills you want to keep learning, but then there's always another skill you can stack on top of it, right?
Well, so much so that at Weber, right, I was getting ready to be able to move off of the drill press machining and move to the cushy end of the plant where they were doing the seats and stuff. And that was a much better job, paid more and all that kind of stuff. And I got that from just, to your point, stacking skills. I wasn't exactly a manager or a leader, but I was stacking skills. And I got to take field trips and go to these plants about quality. I went to French's Mustard and things like that and learned how they did things and was able to bring that back. So you start learning no matter what it is in that regard. And so I did that and then ended up going back again. As I mentioned, I met somebody, we got married, it didn't work out. And then my mom became ill. And then it was around that time that I ended up homeless again. And now I'm in my mid-20s.
Did you become homeless because you stopped everything to take care of her?
No, it's because I left everything and didn't have much and came up to St. Louis and ended up getting back with my wife at the time, and we were staying at her parents' house. So
I'm going to stop you for a sec. So you became homeless because of a relationship that you had with your wife.
Yeah.
Which is a testament because the person that you marry is the most important decision you're going to make in your life.
Without a doubt.
Right? And that took you down. So I was wondering how you became homeless again.
Yeah. So what happened was that she was living with her parents when I came back up. And with all the pride I had, I ended up having to live with them. But I immediately went out and got 2 jobs. And I was working 2 jobs all the time. And she one time got liquored up and told me I had to leave work and come home right now or don't come home, blah, blah, blah. And it ended up getting where I didn't go home. And I ended up, from that point, I ended up living out of my car. And so I had this 1972 Cutlass Supreme that I had everything I owned in it, which was 2 hefty bags. And that became my home. And so I would still be going to work, but everything I owned was in the back of my car, be driving around in the day, not having any place to stay. I ended up staying with my sister for a little bit, my half-sister who lived in the middle of St. Louis, but I couldn't stay there for very long because my sister was running a prostitution house out of her apartment. And so whenever the Johns would come over with their tricks, I would get kicked out and I'd have to leave. So that didn't last very long. And so I'd drive around in my home, right, which was my car, and I'd end up going to a rest stop on the edge of the city. And that's where I'd sleep overnight. I'd go get ready in the rest stop, wash up, and go to work.
Did anybody know you were homeless at this point? At work?
That was one. I don't know if they knew. That's a good point. But the people I was around who I tried to stay with, that was when everybody started locking their doors on me and not having anything to do with me. So I'm getting ready, and then one day I'm driving down Kings Highway, a big road in St. Louis, and the transmission fell out of my home in the middle of the road, and now I didn't have a car. So there I am walking down the street with these 2 hefty bags. That's my life. And I go stay with my sister for a little bit, and then I hitchhike back down to Texas.
We've hitchhiked a lot, Michael.
Yeah, we did.
What's hitchhiking like?
So I did hitchhike a lot between 15 and in my 20s, and mainly back and forth between Texas, someplace in Texas and someplace in St. Louis. So it's about 690 miles or something. So that back and forth through Oklahoma.
Is it like in the TV shows where they only go so far, they drop you off and you have to find somebody else?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's all kinds of stories there in the book as well about, Oklahoma's known for the Red River. It's because they have this red mud. Well, I can remember not having a ride, not getting a ride because it's raining cats and dogs in Oklahoma, and I have to sleep in a ditch. And I wake up and I'm covered in this red mud, and I have to wait for the rain to wash it off so I can start hitchhiking.
Because you couldn't move.
Yeah, you couldn't move. I got picked up by guys that were drug runners that had a trunk full of drugs. One time me and this guy were hitchhiking, and we went to a trailer park and stole a car, hot wired it, and took off until it ran out of gas. We would get cleaned up by jumping over the Holiday Inn fence and jumping in the pool and washing up and getting back on the road. We ended up meeting girls or whatever they would give us rides. So it was definitely something memorable. Got picked up one time in a hopped up Mustang with an old mountain man and his wife in there, and had his beer, and he said, "Do you smoke?" And he pulled out this big, huge joint and passed it to us in the back. And, just that was the kind of life going back and forth. I got picked up by a guy who in Oklahoma City, who was just driving around in Oklahoma City, and he was like our age. And he said, "Where you guys headed?" I said, "We're heading to St. Louis. You want to just drop us off at the edge of the city?" He said, "No, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to go up there." So he ends up driving us all the way to St. Louis. Then we end up deciding we're going to go to Florida and live. So we drive back down to Oklahoma City. We get back to his home so he can pick up his stuff, and the police are waiting for them. They arrest him, and we're sitting there with no ride, no nothing. So we're back.
You should have just stayed. Was there any any time you feared for your life while hitchhiking?
Yeah. There were some times. I mean, I was picked up by a school teacher one time who tried to molest me and things like that when I was really young, and just out and about. And again, it was just a scary life in general. You didn't know when you were going to get a ride. You didn't know when you were going to get arrested. You stop into towns and you steal from the store so you have something to eat. and then you hustle your way and hope you can get back on the highway and get picked up before the cops show up. You didn't want anybody to pick you up when that car ran out of gas. And
is your life just filled with like anxiety and angst at this point? Right, you're just living in it, and then from your childhood, that's probably all you've ever known.
That's a great choice of words, is the anxiety piece from it. And you wouldn't believe how chill I am these days.
Well, I can tell right now. I was wondering if you still knew the mountain man with the big joint.
I did.
So, okay, so we're homeless again. So what happens now? Is this when we get the mailroom job?
Yeah, so what happened was I went back to Texas, right? Went back to Gainesville, lived there, and then I started dating this girl who lived in Dallas, and she was the sweetest thing in the world and nice enough. But once again, I had too many issues. She was a good girl. I had too many issues. It wasn't going to ever last. But I was with her for a few years dating, and I had some friends that moved from Gainesville to Dallas. And I was driving back and forth like an hour to see her. So I'm working right in Gainesville. I had a car. And so I'm driving back and forth to see her. And these friends knew that, and they lived in Dallas. So they invited me up. No promise of paying rent or anything. They invited me up to stay with them and see if I could find a job in Dallas. And then I would be closer to this young lady. And so that was super nice of them. It was the first time somebody actually reached out and extended an olive branch to give me some help here.
What did that feel like?
It just felt awesome. To this day, I give them credit. We're still connected. They've got an incredible family, still live outside of Gainesville. And he ended up working for a trucking company. But him and his wife were just sweet as anything. And so I ended up seeing her. Eventually, I broke it up with her. I went through trying to find jobs, couldn't find jobs, blah, blah, blah. And they never asked questions. They never questioned me. They let me stay in their home, offered me the room up and all that, pay when you can, whatever. And so that's when I ended up going through a couple of jobs that didn't work out. And I was looking at this little tiny ad in the Dallas Morning News that said mailroom clerk. Right, and I needed a job really bad, and I was looking at this little tiny ad. And I don't know, paid $8.62 an hour. Remember, made like $16,000 a year, and to work in the smell room. I said, that's something I should be able to do. Oh my gosh! I walk into this huge building that was just this huge skyscraper. Went up in this elevator with all of this incredible wood and mirrors and everything, and I get off on the floor. Here I am applying for this job. I had some polyester pants from Kmart. I had so like I said, I didn't think, once again, my insecurities come into play. I'm like, oh my gosh, this building is so awesome. This office is so awesome. Everybody's so suited up, right? I'll never get this job. But I said, so I turned back to go back towards the elevator, and the weirdest thing happened. So the elevator doors open up, and a guy steps out that works there that I went to high school with in Gainesville, Texas. And I was like, Wes, what are you doing here? He goes, I work here. I'm one of the accountants here, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, I was thinking about applying. Yeah, apply. So I applied, and I ended up getting a job in the mailroom, and that's where everything changed for my career, my life, and that's where I ended up. I was working there when I met my wife, but and all of it kind of came together. It was. Just,
do you think that's a testament of you not giving up? Right, because even though we're hitting rock bottom, so we're roller coastering, right? But you didn't give up. Is that what happens when you don't give up? Eventually you catch a break?
So I tell people that I almost titled this book "Refuse to Fail." If you refuse to fail, but the publisher liked the rock bottom name better. So if you refuse to fail, no matter what, eventually it's going to happen for you. But again, I also say refuse to fail, but to your point about the soul and the heart and the belief, I mean, those are all really strong things that allow you to climb out of it. You just got to believe in people. You can't give up on people. You can't give up on opportunities. You can't give up on your faith. I mean, there's so many things that can help you if you don't give up and you refuse to fail.
Yeah, and if you even change the perspective on failing, like we can say you never failed. You just kept learning.
True.
Right?
True.
And I think, we all have this trait in us, the self-sabotage. It's kind of like what was happening to you before you got to this mailroom.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you even said it with a couple of the women you dated. They're too good for me. So,
right.
And that makes sense. Having the upbringing, you intrinsically didn't know your worth yet.
That's exactly right.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is where everything changes.
Yeah. It's where that crack in the window, that door open, an opportunity, and it just had, when you think about the stars that become everything they are, something happened, right? Or we'd all be doing it, right? And in my
it could be one moment.
Yeah, and you have to be always looking for that moment too, right? And don't pass it up. If it's calling to you, go for it. And so in this case, it took meeting the CEO of this company from the mailroom. It was about 150.
How'd you meet him? You give him his mail?
So yeah, I did do that. I don't know if you ever seen the movie Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox, but he's working in a mailroom and he's pushing his car. I did all of that, right, and worked in the mailroom. And then they also had an off-site storage facility because we worked the top 500 banks in the country, and so we provided market training for the banks. And so my job was to pack up all the training materials to ship them to the training sites and then deliver the mail internally, things like that. And so sometimes I was at the offsite where it's just me and one other person. Sometimes I went to corporate when I was delivering the mail. So I met him, and I don't know exactly when I met him. I know when I won't forget him. And that's when we had an incident where the savings and loan crisis happened in the early 90s and the banking industry fell apart. All these CEOs were being arrested for these banks, and it impacted our business. And one day, the CEO, Robert Hall, walks into the conference room, calls us all into the conference room. All of us crammed in this huge conference room overlooking the city of Dallas. And there were curtains across the windows, and I was so insecure, so intimidated by my surroundings. I was surrounded by a bunch of former bank executives with PhD degrees, and were just super smart and making tons of money. And I was here, this peon, doing a mailroom. Well, I was so nervous about being around all those people that I would hide behind the curtain so nobody saw me. Once again, my insecurities were over.
And you're not a short guy.
Yeah, and it wasn't.
That's a big curtain.
It was easy to do. So I tried to make myself small and insignificant and disappear. And he walks into this room and he literally starts reading this flip chart of, first of all, he described what happened and what happened to them. And he literally started saying, we had to let these people go. We had to lay these people off. And he started crying.
They weren't in this meeting.
No, they weren't in the meeting.
Gone.
He was telling the people that were left that I had to let these people go. And he literally started crying in this room with all of these people. And he stood in front of them and took personal responsibility for the savings and loan crisis that he let them down, me included. And he started crying and sharing the names as if he knew every one of them, which he did, and their families, and he let them all down. And I stepped away from that curtain. I said, I've not ever seen anybody care like that in any company, any family member, anybody I ever knew. I've never seen anybody care like that. And I'd only been there a couple of months, but at the same time, I didn't get laid off. And I was like, I don't know why I didn't get laid off. I tell myself it's because my pay was so low they didn't see it on the bottom of the ledger.
And probably nobody wanted to get their own mail.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that would have been a pain. I have to explain that to the kids today. You call that email today, but we used to put mail in slots. And so I stepped away from that curtain, and it was that time I told myself that I'm in this mailroom, but I'm going to do everything I can from where I'm at to help this company be successful.
Why do you think you thought that?
Because I felt so much sincere disappointment from this person and in himself and letting the company down that I wanted to save him.
Right.
And so I was going to build up. So we went from this 150 people down to 14 people. We went from this I forget where we were at the time. We were a multi-million-dollar company, and we went down to $4 million in revenue, right? And so everybody had to do everything. So I was forced to learn a bunch of different stuff.
What did you have to learn?
So I had to learn how to do production of materials. I had to learn how to do editing of materials. I had to learn how to do.
So you're acquiring skills.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I had to learn how to do graphic design. I had to learn how to do purchasing and procurement. I had to learn how to do that. I had to learn HR. I ended up having to learn how to be a leader, because as we climbed back, I started growing. And so over a 10-year period, I went from that mailroom to being the senior vice president of a $40 million financial consulting firm.
Is that a testament to, if you have a desire and you have the will, you don't need any formal training to succeed, right? Because for some people don't like college, right? Some people don't want to get that degree. You didn't have a degree then, but you made it that high up based on your character traits.
But I ended up going back and getting an education only because I wanted to.
Right.
It's something I wanted to do, and so I went back to school. But that didn't get me.
You were already there.
Yeah,
I was already there.
I was already there, and so I was going to school at night and doing this during the day, because once again I wanted this company and these people to be so successful. That was the other thing. All these people, all their PhDs, and all you think about bankers and the stuffiness and all that. Once again, they embraced me unconditionally. They allowed me to be me. They knew they didn't know my background, but and so what happened was, this is where this story kind of comes crashing together. So I was the vice president of this consulting firm. I had managed all of our facilities, so we had locations, all these buildings that I was so intimidated by. I'm now negotiating the leases and getting the furniture and everything in place. So they have me doing a million things. I love the diversity. And
did you love the responsibility and the purpose?
Yes. Oh my gosh, my head was so full of everything but getting in trouble.
Right.
And it's the same thing with how I turn my drugs and alcohol into physical exercise and training and developing my mind, body. I call it hands, mind and body, right? And I started developing all that. And so it was like in the last year of the company before they sold, they came to me and they promoted me from vice president to senior vice president of administration for the entire facility. So I was one of the senior executives sitting in the executive leadership meetings and everything. I couldn't believe that I got this promotion. So I couldn't take it. And so
You couldn't take what?
I couldn't take the promotion.
Why?
Because I couldn't take it with my soul bearing what it was bearing about what they didn't know about me. So I scheduled a meeting with the CEO. I walked into his office, sat down there, and I said, Robert, I so appreciate this promotion. Thank you so much for that. But I don't know that I can accept it. And I said, because I've got to tell you something. So I sat there and I told him about my past. I told him about the decades of abuse, the homelessness, the crime, the drugs, the gangs, the families, the twisted families, and everything that I grew up with, and not having the education that all these people have, not having the backgrounds that they had, and I didn't think that I could move forward with this role without letting you know all of this. So here's Robert in his style, very calm. Once again, a meditating man that was very calm, that helped me be who I am today. He looked at me and he pushed away from the desk. I said, oh my God, he's going to call security and have me thrown out of the building. He's going to pick up the phone and call. And he just walked around the desk and he gave me the biggest, most heartfelt hug that I have never felt from my dad, never felt from anybody, of just sheer love from a person to a person. And
did you break down?
Yeah. And I think he did too. And from that moment, he is a lifelong mentor of mine that I talked to him last week. I talk to him any time I can. He's since retired, but he always, and he did this when I was there, whenever I walk into a room with him, he could have a million things going on. We could have a Fortune 500 bank that he's trying to close a $15 million deal on, and he would stop down and he would act like I'm the only person in his life and in his room. He would listen to me intently. He would just, you could just see that he wanted you to be successful unconditionally. And he helped me build the kind of leader I wanted to become, which eventually led to how I ended up here in Rhode Island.
What's it like to have another person believe in you to the extent that he believed in you? Now, the book I gave you, my children's book, Pug Learns to Believe, the similar story is that he wants to be president of the United States. His teacher says you can't, right? So he goes home and his mother can tell that Pug's not being his normal, jovial self. And she says, what's the matter? And he tells her, everyone laughed at me. I can't do this.
Yep.
And she says, well, Pug, if you believe in yourself, you can accomplish everything. But then she's like, but I already know somebody who already believes in you. And he goes, who's that, Mom? She goes, me. Right? Because sometimes you just need that one person to believe in you, and it just ignites you because that person does. And was it Rob?
Robert, yeah.
Yeah. But what was that like for you?
So remember you gave the rubber band analogy?
Yeah.
Well, this is more like a cannon. It's kind of like it lit the cannon and the cannonball shot out, and I was the cannonball. And there was no stopping me after that. Because not only did I have Robert there, I had my new fiance and future wife also believing in me.
So you had more yet.
And that's all I needed, man. I mean,
that's 200% more than
exactly.
For you, though, why do you think you had to tell him your history when you were going to be promoted to senior vice president and not vice president?
Well, because the roles were different. Okay. So at a vice president, I had kind of a department vice president. I was responsible for production and printing and shipping and materials and things like that, development of the materials we use. At senior vice president administration, I was technically over all the PhDs, over all these bank executives. I mean, when I made a decision, I had to guide them correctly. And somehow he and the CFO believed in me, that I was the one for that leadership role. And I didn't believe in myself until I said what I said. And then they made me believe in myself, where I went and just hopefully knocked it out of the park.
Well, I'm sure you did. Do you think, based on your upbringing now, you were interacting with people in jail, in drugs, you were interacting with PhDs, people in the mailroom, hitchhiking across the country. You developed the skill that you can connect with anybody and you can talk to anybody. Do you think that's one of your secrets to success?
Well, yes and no, because part of the problem is I was so insecure, I wasn't talking to anybody.
Okay.
I was so introverted, it's unbelievable. And I crack people up that I speak to 2,000 people in a prison system or at a major university, and I'm speaking to our one of the high schools here, and I speak to these people all lined up. Nobody can believe that I was the guy hiding behind the curtain who couldn't say a word to anybody. And now I'm able to laugh at myself. I know I talk funny. I know I have lisp. I have all kinds of issues.
I thought that was a Southern drawl. I don't know.
Yeah, I throw it on thick sometimes, but imagine trying to mix a Southern drawl with this Rhode Island accent.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Yeah. It's a good thing you're tall and good looking.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I'll take the tall part as credit, but that's something I can't avoid.
So, okay, so now we're senior vice president. What traits would you look for in employees?
So again, that kind of brings to what I do today, but I have 7 to 8 vice presidents who report to me, right? And they come from all walks of life. I don't look for a degree. I don't look for how many years you have experience. I don't look if you're blue collar, white collar. I don't look for any of that. I look inside the person, right? And we talk about inside the person. And it's funny because I do that, and sometimes the people that do the hiring, the senior executives, sometimes that they don't understand some of the people that I want to bring in because they have their own MO on how they look at somebody. You know, they don't have a degree. They got to get a degree, blah, blah, blah. No. They have some of the traits that I need. Do they have the work ethic? Do they have the heart and compassion? Because what we do is we manage some of the largest customers. We have 2,200 customers.
This is our current job.
Yeah, the current job.
Okay.
Right. And I think it makes your point that we have 2,200 customers. We have 8,000 employees. My team are specialists that only manage 30 accounts. Those 30 accounts, we're a $900 million company. Those 30 accounts make up 40% of all that revenue.
Okay.
And so,
which is good because if you break my mic, they're gonna have to pay for this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know. I can see the bill coming right now. So the point being is, these take very special skills. You have to understand the voice of the customer. You have to be customer obsessed. You can't do that if you don't have a heart and passion for doing what's right for the customer.
100%. Yeah.
And doing what's right for the employees, the company. And you have to merge those together. If you're in sales, you can say you're focused on the customer, but it comes the end of a quarter and you're trying to get a deal closed, you could care less with that customer thing. You got to get that deal across.
Yeah, you definitely want to be customer centric.
Right. Exactly.
And what you do. And when you talk about a business, you know, you have your sales department, but you have the people that fulfill. Right. And you need to make sure that, like, if you don't fulfill, right, your churn numbers, the people who leave you are just going to be through the roof. And to your point, that's why I'm saying that you can read people because of your upbringing. So you know.
Spot on.
Yeah, you know, like.
Great point.
Right. And so we just met like an hour and a half ago. But instantly when we walked in and talked to each other, we both read each other.
Yeah.
And we knew we were similar energies.
Yeah, first impressions, right? Well, I also knew a little bit from my research on you as well and your background. I was like telling my family, how the heck can this guy be doing all these different things? This is incredible. That's the guy I got to meet, right? Maybe I'll rub off on me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a slacker and I've got books and speaking and jobs.
Well, I appreciate
and all that, right? So just incredible job on your part too. And once again, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. So we're shot out of the cannon. What happens now? Where do we go in this job that we're in now?
So one day, I'm sitting there and I've got this beautiful wife. I've got 2 incredibly beautiful kids that are never going to know what it's like to be abused and not loved. I mean, they are going to have everything that we could want. They're not going to know what it's like to be homeless, desperate. And they're not going to know any of that. But the one thing I did want them to know is that they're going to know people who have been through all that. And so I started journaling my background. So when they were in their 20s, they're just little kids. When they were in their 20s, I wanted to give them this journal to let them know that you look at that person the wrong way, like they're homeless, like they're a gang member, like they're trouble and all of that, and you go the other way and all that. I get all of that. But you should know that behind that facade, behind what they're dealing with, there's a real person in there. And guess what? Your dad was one of those people. And here's what led me to be where I'm at. That's what they need. They need their break. You might be that break. I literally wanted to teach them the meaning of character. And so I wrote it, and here's where it gets weird. So my wife read it, and she thought it should be more than just a journal. And then Robert read it and said it should be more than just a journal. And then I had an editor read it, and they thought it should be more than just a journal. And then that's when I decided, I'm getting ready to make a mistake here if I do this. So kind of put it on the shelf for a little bit.
Because you'd be vulnerable, you'd expose yourself.
Which led to how I ended up here. So that's sitting on the shelf a little bit. I'm recruited out of Dallas so we ended up selling the company Action Systems, where I built my career. And the company that bought us, they were a .com company that ended up in 2000 experienced the .com boom and then fall. Our stock went from $100 a share in January of 2000 to 18 cents a share in October.
I hope you sold it before that.
Yeah, I couldn't.
You invested,
neither
right?
could Robert.
Got you.
You had to wait a year
before
you could sell it, so we didn't make it. And Robert was going to be worth a lot of money, and so he ended up having to walk away with less than that. But so that happened, and that the CFO of the company ended up leaving there, but he knew of me and recruited me over to the company. And I had more issues with this guy than anything, but apparently he saw who I was inside and actually took it.
Now you're leaving Robert at this time?
Yeah, so I'm leaving Robert. Robert's going to work for a different company.
How hard was that?
So I always stayed in touch with him. It was kind of cool because I now wasn't working for him or with him, but we were still friends and mentor. Now I could call him.
So there was a little bit of a break. Like, was this before you got transferred off?
Yeah, up here, yeah.
So even when you were together down there, you were kind of different. So it was like a slow break.
It was.
Okay, so it wasn't like this.
So I worked for this company for 5 years, and then I tried to buy part of the company, and they didn't want to sell it to me because they had their cake and eating it too. I was senior director of administration for this healthcare company, and I was doing like 7 different roles in the company. One of them was managing their storage records management division, and they had 3 locations. I tried to buy it from them, and they made the price so high, ridiculous, because they wanted me to stay there, so I couldn't do it. But at the same time, the attorney working on the deal was based up here in New England, and that was their attorney, and he reached out to me to say, hey, there's a company up here that they're looking for somebody to come in and run it and build it. And they're looking for a CEO. And I said, my lights went off to say, wow, could you imagine where I've come from to get recruited up? And so they courted me for months. And then they ended up putting together a package offer to bring me up here.
Did you feel you needed to tell them your past before?
Well, that's going to come.
Okay.
So that's how the book comes into play. So I get recruited up there, and I get recruited up here to Rhode Island, right, to head up this company. And as a 75-year-old family-owned business, it's the first time in the company's history that they brought anybody from outside the company to run it. So I come in as a family, it's a father and 2 daughters are involved with the business. And there were 2 brothers involved, but they had a bad parting, and just the one brother, the father, was involved. And so they recruited me up here, and I came up here. The goal was to build the business 3 or 4 years, sell out, and sell the company, and then I would have enough where we could go back to Texas, live any kind of life before the kids went to high school. We built the business up, tripled the revenue, tripled the divisions I tried to buy from the former company. They offered to us for 1/3 of the cost after I left.
when you got to the company,
Yep.
what are the first levers that you changed to make it more profitable?
I became the sales guy.
Okay.
So I sold some of our biggest deals, like some of the companies I sold to. So we were in healthcare, right? And they were doing a lot of recycling of silver and things like that, but they were also doing healthcare records management. So a couple of the levers I pulled were, I said, everything that's in every one of our warehouses, I want to make them available to our patients and providers electronically. You didn't have that back in 2008, right? So we started converting everything and delivering it back images, whether it be through radiology, x-rays, mammography, paper records, whatever, we could deliver it back to them. So that's one of the things. So our costs got more efficient to do that. And then I sold some big deals, like I sold Care New England, that was $5 million, and so some deals and pulled them away from the largest provider in this industry that was doing it. So those are some of the things that I did. And I went back and bought those other divisions for a fraction of the cost and then made them profitable and built them up. So collectively, we were able to grow it. Our margins grew, the revenue grew, we grew the company, we grew the space. They had a broken down warehouse here in Cranston, and then they had the main facility in downtown Providence. So we ended up expanding. So they'd had like 30,000 square feet. We ended up expanding where we had almost 150,000 square feet here, 2 locations here, one in Florida, one in Texas, one in Maryland. And so we grew the business, right? And so while it was time to sell, I think the owner felt that he once again, he had his cake and he was eating it too. He didn't want that finite sale. So he kept the business going and didn't sell it. And so 3 years turned into 8. But during that time, when I was working up here, I'm a CEO now, and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm thinking to myself, okay, how did this happen for me? Where I came from and where I'm at today, I'm like, why? Why did this happen? And I'm looking at my reflection in the mirror. I said, damn it, because I'm supposed to do something with this. And so that's when I finished the book, found an editor, and then I found a publisher. The editor was supposed to find the publisher. They never did. So I started sending it out and found a publisher who picked it up and turned it into a book. Now, here's the tricky part. The owner didn't know about my past. He only knew what he knew up front. So I drove out to where they lived up in New Hampshire. I took his wife and him to dinner, and I shared the story.
Were you with your wife?
No, just by myself, because I didn't know how they were going to react to it. And so I shared, we had this restaurant overlooking the water, and I shared the book with them. And I told them about my past, and it's all led to this moment right here. And I knew the risk.
Did you consult Robert first?
I did, yeah. I consulted Robert about everything. I consulted whether I should
about this podcast?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Tell him I said hello.
But it kind of happened pretty quickly.
Yes, yes.
Right?
If you're in business, right, you got to take massive action.
Got to keep moving. No, I'm learning a lot from you already. I'm telling you right now. But yeah, so I talked to Robert before I came up here and took this job. I talked to Robert before I wrote the book. I talked to Robert before I met with the owners. And so at first they embraced it. They gave me a big old hug and everything about it. I gave them the first copy and things like that. But I knew the risk that was involved with it, because the goal was that I was going to cash out and make millions.
Sure.
And so I told him the story, and then later on he came back and said that he couldn't even get through the first half of it because it was so disturbing and blah, blah, blah. So, but it gets better. You got to keep reading. So I don't know that he ever read it completely. But then what happened was the book came out in March of 2011. And when it came out, all of a sudden, all kinds of good things started happening. At least I thought they were. So I was featured on the front page of the Providence Journal. I was then featured on Sunday Providence Journal. Then I was getting all these interviews. I was interviewed by Fox in Massachusetts and different things like that. So I was getting this press, and it was like really doing awesome to see how it was kicking off. But suddenly, so then all these marketing companies started contacting us, right, and saying, wow, you can't buy this kind of press. We can take this and really promote the company, right, and make the company successful. Well, it kind of changed when I got the letter to cease and desist that the their attorneys contacted me. They had the assumption that I was using the company to promote the book, and it was the opposite. The book was, at least to the marketing companies, was designed to promote the company.
Didn't you have the relationship with the owner? Were they?
Yeah, so I thought I had a relationship, but then I realized that he didn't want the family and the family business to be affiliated with my past.
Okay. And how'd you feel about that?
So
did you understand it on some level?
I'll tell you why I understood it, because I thought about it ahead of time. I predicted the risk, and to say, if I do this, the one thing I'm not going to do is not going to judge any responses that I get for the book. I have to take it as it is and expect the outcomes. The relationship didn't survive, and I ended up leaving the company. But still, I ended up doing exactly what I wanted with this book. I give away more copies than I sell. I'm able to speak to homeless shelters at 11 o'clock at night, or be in New York speaking to the Correctional Convention, or speaking to Bryant University.
Or being in a basement in Cranston.
Or being in a basement in Cranston. Yes.
With the cops walking down.
With the cops walking down. I felt right at home. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
I shielded you, though. I said, he's not in here.
Yeah, I know. I thought I was sitting there with that rubber axe over there. Well, you're going to have to edit a lot.
No, we're leaving that in. Yeah. I leave the good parts in. Don't you worry about it.
I can't wait to see. I've seen this is going to be crazy. So anyway, it did not move forward, and I ended up back at the drawing board. But
financially, though, were you all set at this point now?
So financially, I wasn't all set because, again, this was right in the middle of both my kids going to college.
Okay.
And so I had to take care of that. And my cash, there wasn't a cash out. I was able to walk away with my results intact and did okay for that. And it gave me a runway to getting to where I'm at today with my career. So I had to keep working. Okay. What I wanted to do was take this and turn it into my full-time thing, because I could afford to do that and travel and speak. I mean, and not charge people. But, I've been to Chicago with this story, Texas, all over, sharing it, and it resonates pretty well. But back to the point about not judging, I get all kinds of reactions. So I spoke to a group called the Dallas CEO Netweavers Group. So it's a networking group of CEOs, CFOs, and so on. I spoke to this in this country club with these really expensive buffet breakfasts and things, and they had me come in as a keynote of their breakfast event. So there's like 75, 100 CEOs, CFOs, and business leaders at this thing. And I tell the story. And I told the story about the thorn bush branch across my legs and how it ripped my skin, bleeding and screaming bloody murder and all that, and learned how not to cry and things like that. And this lady CEO stood up, and she was totally appalled at me, to the point of, why didn't you do anything about it? I'm so angry that you didn't do anything. You didn't go anywhere. You didn't tell anybody. And I tried to remind her that I was 8 years old and scared to death and blah, blah, blah. Or at the time, 4 or 5 years old, I didn't know what to do with all that. But I had to realize that they don't have any frame of reference in their life for how they got, which is my whole point about reading people of all different ilks. Some of these CEOs, they've gone through all the path that got them to their career, that they can't relate to this. But the thing that I loved about it, it really hit a nerve that really made a difference in her mind about this, and hopefully she does something with it. The funny thing is I didn't have to say anything. Another CFO stood up, and it just happened to be the CFO that worked with Robert that gave me the promotion. He stood up and told the story of my past working with them, and just with tears in his eyes, the whole audience cheered it. And so I have experiences like that. Spoke at Emmanuel House, right? And speaking to all the homeless people, they come.
Are they listening?
So there's a story about that, right? So when I get to the Emmanuel House, you can't go until like after 11 p.m. or something because they don't let the men come in until the end of the night. And they all get there and they're all in all these beds and everything. And the director brings me in to speak to the group. And I'm speaking to them and I'm talking to them. And it's so funny because they're all there. Some of them are laying in their beds. And right in the middle of my talk, I hear some guy yell from one of the beds, "Shut up, I'm trying to go to sleep." Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's what I got. Don't judge. But at the same time, there was a guy in the corner that was just eating it up and just totally engulfed in it. And the director pulled me aside to tell me who he was. And apparently he was a guy that was doing really well and he got hooked on crack. And he was working on the streets and selling crack on a corner, and he kept getting in trouble. And now he's homeless, trying to kick the habit. He's having such a problem. So then that kid talked to me, and he was just so articulate, so smart, so ready to go. And him and I just had a good conversation about, to your point, the steps to go forward, refuse to fail, get the drive and go do it and make this more important than what you're doing now. And so it went really well. So I have to do a lot of that, that kind of stuff. But that's the kind of stuff I loved to do, see. And then the last story I'll tell you is I spoke to Central Falls High School, and they have a lot of inner city kids. They have a lot of low income families. So
Central Falls, it used to be the cocaine capital of New England. I'm not sure if it still is, but
I don't know if it was on this day or not. Nobody offered me any. But I'm standing up there. I'm speaking to juniors, seniors, and the faculty. I did this at North Smithfield. I've done it at several schools, and I was speaking to this audience, and I asked them, the faculty beforehand, what's off limits?
Sure.
They said nothing. I said, you sure about this? Because if you read my story, so I literally started talking about it. And one of the things I talk about is is being sexually abused as a child multiple times, and I tell them the story about it. And afterwards, I talked about everything. They gave me an hour, and the students start lining up to talk to me after I'm done, one after another. And it's just kind of amazing. And they were allowing them to do it. I couldn't believe they were doing this, but it must have made it enough of a difference where they could do that. And they come up, and I was going to talk to every single one of them as long as I could. And every kid that came up would tell me the story about, well, I want to do this. I'm going to be rich doing this. How did you get rich doing this? How did you do this or that? And blah, blah, blah. And with every student that came up, I embraced, we moved forward. And I noticed out of the corner of my eyes, I noticed this young lady, I found out she was 17 years old. She was just completely the most radiant smile, the most bright eyes. I was just drawn to how her aura around her, how bright she was over everybody else that was walking up one after another. And as she got closer, I could tell she was extremely autistic. And so she was autistic, but she wouldn't break that smile with those beautiful big teeth and everything. And she just got to me. And what did she do? She leans over, hugs me, and she says, I am so sorry for what you went through. I am so sorry that you had to deal with that. I know what you're talking about because my uncle is doing that to me right now. So it was at that moment that I said nothing else matters than this moment. And she told that to me. I said, what do I do with this? But I know one thing, it justified why I do this. Because when I went to the faculty afterwards, we got in a group and had to go, and I said, do you all know so-and-so? Yeah, we know her. She's a part of our special needs program. I said, okay, here's what she told me. The awe and gasp in the room was just palatable. It was just unbelievable how they responded to it. And they said, oh my God, we've always suspected something was going on, but she's never told anybody. The fact that she told you, we can now do something about it. And so that's when I said that no matter what it is, this is my purpose. And so this one last quick story. So I speak to Salve Regina College, 4 years running, 2 semesters per year. The criminal justice professor brings me in to speak to his students. As an essay, he has them read the first half of Rock Bottom. He just gives them the first section of it. And they have to write in their essay what happened to Mike. Okay? So they write the story. And here's the other thing he does. At the end of the semester, he'll sometimes bring in special speakers. And he'll bring them from all walks of life. So he brings in this guy, right, who's a business leader, who works for this company, who's been doing this. He's CEO, blah, blah, blah. He's run these companies. And he's going to come in and talk about criminal justice as a career. These are future lawyers, criminal justice administration, judges, whatever, highway patrol, police, whatever. They're all in these classes. And I tell them about my life today, right? Here's what I do. Here's my family. My kids go to college, blah, blah, blah. I'm CEO of this company, right? And, I understand what you are going to do. And then he stops them. And he says, class, this is Mike. And they go, yeah, I know. You introduced him as Mike. I was so far removed from it. And said, no, this is Mike from your essay. And the reaction of these students, because for 4 years running, 2 semesters every year, 8 different classes of students, every single one of them said that I died. That it's an unfortunate, sad story, society's throwaway. He just couldn't survive that. So when they hear my name and hear who I am, I see grown football players break down and cry. I see young ladies scream to the top of their lungs, shaking because of the story. To say that you've got a story where somebody has come from the depths of hell to be able to circle back and try to give back to people, it just blew them away. And it's another reason why I do this.
And that's super powerful. And I think it comes back to the point where, if we're training them to be lawyers and police officers and people who are going to be serving the public, you need to remember that these people are still human.
Exactly.
Right? And I think I say this a lot, but we're all spirits having a human existence, right?
It's true.
And we all really want the same things.
Right.
We want to be happy, healthy. We want to be loved. Right. We want to be embraced by Robert or somebody like Robert, right? And I think a lot of times when you see somebody who's homeless or who's hit rock bottom, yeah, you do shut the door on them, right? Because you think you can't help them. And again, I understand you can only give so much of yourself until you start losing yourself, right? Such as your family, because you can't pour from an empty cup. But
true,
it doesn't mean if you're in one of those jobs or if you have somebody like that, they're still a person, right? And it makes you want to remember that you should at least try to help. And you know what? Maybe you're not the one that can actually help them, but that second or third person could be. That's what you are to some people, right? Even with the child with autism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure maybe even the teachers asked her multiple times, but she had to talk to somebody who could relate, who she could trust for that to come out. I think that's one of the super important things to remember is that.
Yeah, I think the thing that people who've read the book, so every year I'm invited to Woonsocket School, and I speak to their technical school, and I speak to their English and communication class. It's required reading for the students there, and they have to write an essay on it and tell stories. They do an incredible job. It's a great teacher out there, and they have to tell the story. And every time she brings me out, she reminds me, she wants me to tell the story of forgiveness. Okay, so everything that we just talked about, the thing that sticks out most to them is my stepmother abused me for a decade, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, you name it, she abused me. Her stepsons abused me in other ways, right? And it just kept on forever. When I went and achieved my success at Action System, and I was driving a brand new car, and had my new wife, and we drove down to Gainesville, and they were living in a broken down piece of land that they were still paying on, in a broken down trailer house that had fallen apart. And I went there for Mother's Day, and I was there, and I gave her a Mother's Day card.
This is your stepmom?
My stepmom. And I gave my stepmom, Peggy, a Mother's Day card, and gave it to her. And in the card, I wrote that I don't know what it was, and why I caused you to have to punish me all of those years, right? But I just wanted to ask you for your forgiveness. If you could forgive me, I really want that, right? And she acknowledged the card, but she never acknowledged anything inside of it.
Did you really think you needed to be forgiven for that?
No, I think what I need to do was let go.
Right.
And when I asked her to forgive me, it was sincere. That's the other thing I tell people. If you're going to ask for forgiveness, make it sincere.
But do you think you need to ask for forgiveness? Shouldn't she be asking you for forgiveness?
Well, you could look at it. You could look at it that way. But was she going to ask me for forgiveness? But imagine how it feels when somebody you've abused for decades looks at you, gives you something that you have to read, and ask you for forgiveness. Does that not make them think about it? I know one thing it did for me. When I walked away from that trailer, remember the rubber band theory? It just dropped off my shoulders. Mm-hmm. It just all fell off and let it go. And this is the one thing that sticks with this teacher and her students every year. And they stand up and tell the stories. And again, they've got some really rough. Some of them have a really rough future ahead of them if they don't find their own path and find somebody to embrace them. Which
is why I think it's important they see somebody like you who came out the other end. And just to piggyback on the forgiveness thing, like if you're holding a grudge or you want revenge, it only really hurts you. It doesn't hurt that person. They might not even be thinking about it. You know, like I have a childhood friend who was bullied in elementary school. We're 40 now. I was texting with him last night. And he was telling me how, you know, he can't stand people and he hates that he can't stand people, but it stems from the bullying he was like in fourth grade. Right. And, you know, he holds on to that, but it's not hurting the people that bullied him. They don't even remember it. Right. So like at some point we need to just remember that like we can let it go and we can make a decision to choose a better option, you know, and you're a living, breathing example of that for a lot of these children or adults, whoever they are.
Yeah, and well, think about that too. Just like what you said about this individual who was bullied in the fourth grade and he's 40 years old and still comes to his mind. Imagine what you could do if you cleared that headspace. Yeah,
it's definitely affected him. You can see, you know, and I'm a friend. I'm like you, right? So I can tell when people try to save people. And I was like, hey, listen, like you have the perfect life, right? Like you have a wife who loves you. Like you repair video games, which is like your passion. Like how many people could say they do that? You live in New Hampshire. Like you actually have like the perfect life for you, you know? And he's like, yeah, I guess so. So it's kind of like redirecting them and just,
agree.
a lot of that.
And that kind of encouragement is just little bits helps people all along the way. Sometimes just from a perfect stranger. You see acts of kindness that just, you don't know what it means to that person. There's crazy stories where I try to do things without expecting anything in return because I just want that person to have that moment because I could tell what they're going through. And so I try to do something in that regard. But yeah, it just makes you feel good. Now, the thing about this whole me sitting here with you today, the other biggest concern I had about writing the book and telling the stories is that people were going to think that I'm pathetic and that I want sympathy out of this. And I'm telling everybody will listen, I'm not the one who requires any sympathy. I've got the best life in the ever-loving world. It's those people that have an opportunity that are not going to find that path that we need to be worried about and thinking about. So that's why I put this out there, to hopefully give people hope, inspire people, and let them find their success. My success is not your success. The success may just be to get a good job, have a family, grow old together, watch your kids grow. That may just have a normal job or anything. That may be life. That's okay. I could have easily been happy with a run-of-the-mill job if that was who I was. And a lot of people are that. Like I know family members that went on to get multiple PhDs and their brother went on to work in a factory. But both of them are as happy as can be. You just got to create that path of success and what that means to you.
Yeah, and the purpose of life is to be happy. And for every person, that's a little bit different.
Exactly.
Right? And I think the whole purpose of you can be summed up in you're trying to show other people they can be happy by just making better decisions.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, you're one choice away from a better life.
I agree with that. So my last question. So someone's watching this. They're maybe where you were, they were homeless. Maybe they're addicted to drugs. Maybe they're just depressed. Maybe they're not living the life they want to live. What advice do you give them to start living the better life?
Find somebody who can lift them up. And it could be, if you're going to a homeless shelter, it could be somebody in that homeless shelter. Maybe not another homeless person, but maybe the director, maybe a counselor, maybe somebody that can guide you to somebody. Maybe you're working a job and you're at the front line and you talk to the manager, you talk to a district manager when they come in, and look for people that can help you get there, not for the people that pulled you down. One of my biggest choices that I made was letting go of the people that were pulling me down. And they were keeping me down because they were telling me, you're a loser like us, you do drugs, let's drink alcohol, let's party, don't go to work, blah, blah, blah. Or I have those people like my buddy Chris, who I started working out at the gym, and I met him at this gym, and we started working out together. And then we started, this for my wife Lisa, and we were just dating. We were just dogs, right? And we were both coming up in our careers. He had a good college degree. He had a full boat scholarship because he was an Olympic swimmer and all that other kind of stuff. So he was doing really well. And he had big jacked up blonde haired California kid, right? And buffed up working out. And him and I started working out together and become friends. Then we started partying together. We started doing things together, started going out and everything. And here's the one thing I learned. We would go out partying and we wouldn't drink. We wouldn't smoke. We wouldn't do drugs. He didn't even curse. And I'm like, wait a second, how do you survive partying, doing all that stuff? And I learned I could go out and have a good time and not drink, cuss, do drugs, and get into fights like I used to. And
get back to work the next morning.
Yeah, and then wake up, with your head able to do, not wake up and say, where am I now? Yeah.
Well, Michael, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I wish you all the success in the world. I believe that the world needs more people like you who can inspire others, can be like a guiding light, but also show people that there is always another option to choose. You don't have to play the cards you're dealt. You can just get a whole new deck.
Oh yeah, it's so true. And again, I want to thank you for, because the other thing I tell about the book or the speaking or the talking to you, this is my therapy. It helps me just as much as it might help you or the listeners or anything like that. It helps me because, I was a guy with a lot of pain who had a death wish, who was full of rage. And it's not that that's gone away, but I've replaced it with things like this that fill me up. So I appreciate everything you're doing, Mark. Good luck on your run.
I appreciate
for
that.
the government. God love you for that.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
All righty.
Hello, my name is Dr. Marc Bochner. Don't forget to check out my new book, Pug Learns to Believe. Hey guys, Dr. Marc here. Now I know a lot of you want to know how we get all these amazing results with our clients, and it comes down to 3 things. The first is fun fitness classes that burn a lot of calories. 2 is giving you an accountability coach to make sure you stay on track and get the best results. And 3 is the nutrition. Included in the nutrition is our food supplements. So we pair with Prestige Labs because I feel they are the best, they have integrity, and they get great results. These are actually the supplements that I take as well. Here's the awesome part. By clicking the link below, you can save 40% off the retail price. So you need that link to actually save 40%. If you just go to the normal site without my link, you're paying full price, okay? So these are the supplements my clients use. If you are interested, definitely click the link below and it'll tell you all about them.